Life is not a series of random events, nor are our struggles mere disruptions in an otherwise smooth existence. If you listen closely, you'll hear the rhythm, the quiet pulse beneath the noise, the symmetry hidden within the chaos. Just as the universe expands with both force and precision, so too do our lives unfold through moments of breaking and becoming. We often resist our difficulties, as if they are foreign intrusions rather than necessary movements in the great symphony of our becoming. But what if they are invitations? Whispers from the divine, calling us deeper into trust, into transformation. What if the silence we fear is not absence, but the prelude to revelation? Perhaps the weight we carry is not meant to crush us, but to carve us into something truer, something eternal. And maybe, just maybe, the struggles we resist are the very spaces where God is waiting to meet us. Imagine standing at the edge of the ocean, watching the waves roll in. They crash, they retreat, they swell, they subside. There is power in their movement, but there is also precision, a rhythm, a balance. No wave is random. No tide is accidental. Everything moves according to a greater design. Now, what if I told you that your life, your struggles, your triumphs, your uncertainties, follows the same rhythm? What if the moments you see as interruptions are actually intricate, deliberate movements in a much larger composition? We have this habit of treating difficulties as unwelcome guests, as if they have no place in the narrative we are trying to write for ourselves. We resist them, we fight them, we ask, why is this happening to me? But have you ever noticed that the most profound moments of growth, the ones that shape us, rarely come when life is easy? It's the challenges, the setbacks, the nights we think we won't make it to morning. Those are the moments that leave a mark. And yet, when they arrive, we treat them as mistakes in the script. We think, this shouldn't be happening. But what if it should? What if the struggle isn't an error but an essential note in the melody of your life? Every great symphony has contrast, highs and lows, crescendos and silences. Without them, music would be nothing more than noise. And life, at its core, is no different. The difficult seasons, the moments that feel unbearable, are not separate from your story. They are your story. They are shaping you in ways you cannot yet understand. Think about the way a sculptor works. They don't add to the marble, they take away. With every strike of the chisel, something that once seemed solid, unmovable, begins to take shape. The sculptor knows that the masterpiece is already inside. The process is simply about revealing it. But to the untrained eye, it might look like destruction. It might look like loss. It might even seem like ruin. Isn't that how difficulty feels? Like something is being taken from us? Like pieces of who we were, our certainty, our comfort are being chipped away? And maybe they are. But maybe, just maybe, those pieces were never meant to stay. Maybe what feels like breaking is actually becoming. We cannot always see the full picture of our lives as they unfold. Standing in the middle of a storm, we don't see the new landscape being shaped beneath our feet. But when we step back, sometimes years later, we begin to see the patterns, the purpose, the way even the hardest seasons were leading us somewhere meaningful. And so, instead of resisting the difficulties that come our way, what if we leaned in? What if, instead of asking, why is this happening, we asked, what is this teaching me? What if we trusted that even the waves that feel overwhelming are part of a greater movement, one that is guiding us, shaping us, refining us into something truer, something deeper? Life is not a series of random events, and neither are your struggles. They are movements in a grand and deliberate symphony, and when we begin to see them that way, we stop fighting the music and start dancing to it. Pain has a way of making us feel small. It isolates us. It convinces us that we are alone in our suffering, that no one else could possibly understand what we are going through. And when difficulty comes, when life doesn't go the way we planned, it's easy to assume that something has gone wrong, that we are being punished, that we have somehow fallen out of step with the way things were supposed to be. But what if that's not true? What if pain is not a detour, but part of the road itself? What if the very thing we are trying so hard to avoid is actually an invitation? Think about the way nature operates. A seed does not become a tree without breaking open. A caterpillar does not transform without first dissolving completely. Even gold in its rawest form must endure fire before it can shine. The process is not gentle, it is not comfortable, but it is necessary. And yet, when we experience pain, we assume that something unnatural is happening. We ask, why me? But what if the real question is, why not me? What if difficulty is not a sign that we are lost, but a sign that we are growing? It's easy to believe that the people who have found success or fulfillment got there because they avoided struggle. But if you look closer, if you ask anyone who has done something meaningful with their life, you will find that struggle was not the thing that stopped them. It was the thing that shaped them. And yet we spend so much time trying to run from pain as if we could ever truly escape it. We numb it, we distract ourselves from it, we convince ourselves that if we can just push through, we'll eventually reach a place where hardship no longer exists. But that place does not exist. Because struggle is not an obstacle in the way of life. Struggle is life. If we could shift our perspective, even slightly, if we could see pain not as a punishment but as an opportunity, how different would our lives look? What if, instead of asking, how do I get out of this, we ask, what can I learn from this? Because pain, as much as we try to avoid it, has something to teach us. It teaches us what matters, it strips away the unnecessary and leaves us with what is real. It forces us to slow down, to pay attention, to sit in the discomfort of our own thoughts. It makes us stronger, more resilient, more empathetic, and if we let it, pain can become the very thing that deepens us. Think about the stories we are drawn to, the books, the movies, the history that moves us. Not one of those stories is about a person who lived an easy life. We don't admire people because they avoided hardship. We admire them because they endured it, because they found meaning in it, because they allowed it to shape them into something greater than they were before. And so maybe pain is not the enemy. Maybe it is the chisel in the hands of a sculptor. Maybe it is the fire refining something precious. Maybe, just maybe, it is not breaking us at all. It is making us whole. So we don't like silence. We avoid it, drown it out, fill it with noise, as if emptiness itself is something to be feared. And yet, if we pay attention, silence is everywhere. It's in the space between musical notes, giving the melody its shape. It's in the pause between heartbeats, the breath between sentences, the stillness before a storm. Silence is not absence. It is presence. But when life becomes difficult, when we pray, when we seek answers, and all we get in return is silence, we assume it means nothing is happening. We assume we have been abandoned. We assume that the silence means there is no response at all. But what if silence is not the void we think it is? What if it is not empty, but full of possibility, full of transformation, full of something so profound that it cannot yet be put into words? Think about the way seeds grow. For days, weeks, even months, nothing appears to be happening. The ground looks the same. There is no visible sign of progress. And yet, beneath the surface, something is stirring. Roots are pushing downward, unseen, before anything ever rises above the soil. If you didn't know better, you might think the seed had been forgotten, but it hasn't. It's just growing in a way you cannot yet see. This is what happens in the silence. We want immediate answers, clear direction, a visible sign that everything will be okay. But life doesn't work that way. Growth happens in the waiting. Strength is built in the stillness. Clarity is born not in the noise, but in the quiet. The problem is that we equate silence with inaction. We think that if we don't hear something, if we don't see movement, then nothing is happening. But anyone who has ever faced a great challenge knows that some of the most important work happens in the unseen spaces. Athletes don't grow stronger during the competition. They grow stronger in the unseen hours of training long before they ever step onto the field. Writers don't find their voice in the moment of inspiration. It happens in the quiet, when no one is watching, when the page is blank and the words refuse to come. Trees don't become strong because of the sunlight alone. They grow deep, resilient roots in the darkness underground. And yet, when life becomes difficult, when we reach out for answers and hear nothing in return, we panic. We assume we've been left to figure things out alone. But what if silence is not a sign of abandonment, but of preparation? What if it is in the quiet that we are being formed for something greater than we can yet understand? Look back on your life. The moments when you felt lost, uncertain, when nothing seemed to be moving forward. Didn't those seasons change you? Didn't they teach you something, shape you, strengthen you in ways you couldn't see at the time? Maybe the silence isn't something to run from. Maybe it isn't a void to be filled. Maybe it is a space to be honored. Maybe it is in the waiting that we are becoming exactly who we were meant to be. We spend so much of our lives resisting change, resisting uncertainty, resisting anything that feels out of our control. And when difficulties arise, when life takes an unexpected turn, our first instinct is to fight against it, to push back, to try to force things to go the way we think they should. We convince ourselves that if we just work harder, if we just hold on a little tighter, we can make things turn out the way we plan. But here's the problem. Life doesn't work that way. The more we resist, the more exhausted we become. The more we try to control everything, the more we realize how little control we actually have. And the tighter we cling to our expectations, the harder it is to see the possibilities that exist beyond them. Think about a river. A river doesn't resist the current. It doesn't fight against the rocks in its path. It moves with them. It flows, bends, carves its way forward, not by force, but by surrender. And yet, somehow we convince ourselves that the best way to move through life is to swim upstream, to fight against the natural flow of things, as if struggling harder will somehow get us where we need to go. But what if we let go? Not in a passive way, not in a way that means giving up, but in a way that means trusting. Things will happen as they do, and as they meant to. Trusting that we are being led, that even the detours have purpose, that even the obstacles are shaping us into something stronger. What if we stopped seeing every challenge as something to overcome and started seeing it as something to learn from? Because the truth is, the moments that break us open are often the same moments that wake us up. The things we once feared losing become the very things that set us free. And what once felt like an ending reveals itself to be a beginning we never saw coming. Think about how a pilot navigates turbulence. They don't grip the controls tighter, they don't fight the wind, they adjust, they trust the process, and they keep moving forward. Life is not asking us to fight against it, it's asking us to trust it. To trust that even when things don't make sense, even when the road ahead is unclear, there is something bigger at play. And when we stop fighting, when we surrender to the current instead of resisting it, we find that we are carried exactly where we were meant to be all along. It's easy to look at our struggles and think they are setbacks, that they are roadblocks keeping us from the life we were meant to live. But what if they are the very thing shaping us for something greater? What if the pain, the uncertainty, the hardship, they're not distractions from our path, but part of it? We have this idea that life is supposed to be smooth, that if we do everything right, things should work out the way we planned, and when they don't, we assume we've failed. But look at any great story, any person who has done something meaningful, and you'll see a pattern. Difficulty is never a detour, it's the path itself. Every artist, every leader, every person who has left an impact on the world has faced struggle. Not one of them became who they were meant to be without it. Why? Because struggle refines us. It forces us to grow, to adapt, to become more than we were before. Think about a blacksmith working with metal. The metal starts out rigid, unshaped, unformed. It has potential, but it's not yet what it's meant to be, and so it's placed in the fire. It's heated, hammered, stretched, molded. It's uncomfortable, it's painful, but it's only through that process that the metal becomes something strong, something useful, something with purpose. And yet, when life puts us through that same process, we resist it. We assume the fire is there to destroy us, when in reality it's forming us into something we could never have become on our own. Think about the greatest challenges you've faced in your own life, the moments that tested you, that pushed you to your limits. Now think about who you became because of them. Would you have grown in the same way without them? Would you have gained the same wisdom, the same depth, the same strength? We don't grow when things are easy. We grow when things challenge us, when we are stretched beyond what we thought we could handle, when we are forced to dig deeper to find a strength we didn't know we had. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the struggles we try so hard to avoid are actually the very things that prepare us for what we are meant to do. Maybe they shape us, not just for ourselves, but for others. Because when we overcome something, when we walk through the fire and come out the other side, we don't just carry our own strength, we carry the ability to help others do the same. Your struggles are not random. They are not meaningless. They are shaping you, refining you, preparing you for something more. And one day you will look back and realize that the very thing you thought was breaking you is actually making you whole. At some point, we all come to a place where we realize we cannot do this alone. We like to think we can. We tell ourselves that if we just push harder, if we just figure it out, we'll make it through. We wear self-reliance like a badge of honor, convincing ourselves that asking for help is a sign of weakness. But it's not. It never has been, because no one was ever meant to walk this road alone. Think about the way bridges are built. A single beam cannot hold the weight of an entire structure, but when connected to others, when placed in the right design, those same beams can carry the weight of thousands. Strength is not found in isolation. Strength is found in connection, in leaning on something greater than ourselves, and yet, when we struggle, we withdraw. We pull away. We tell ourselves that no one would understand, that no one could possibly help. Sometimes, we even convince ourselves that we are a burden, that our pain is ours alone to bear. But that is the lie that keeps us stuck. Look at history. Every great movement, every great transformation has happened when people came together, when they reached beyond themselves, when they leaned into something bigger than their own strength. This is why inviting God into our difficulties changes everything. Because when we rely only on ourselves, we are limited by our own perspective, our own fears, our own exhaustion. But when we allow ourselves to be guided, when we trust that we don't have to carry it all alone, we begin to see our struggles in a new way. It's like being lost in a dense fog. When you're in the middle of it, all you can see is what's directly in front of you. It's disorienting, overwhelming, but imagine if, for a moment, you could rise above it, see it from a different perspective. From higher up, the path becomes clear. What once felt like chaos has a shape, a direction. That's what happens when we stop trying to control everything ourselves, when we acknowledge that there is a wisdom beyond our own, a purpose unfolding that we may not yet understand. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in history came from people who had the courage to surrender, to stop fighting alone, to trust in something beyond themselves. And when they did, when they let go of the illusion of control, they found strength they didn't know they had. So maybe the question is not, how do I get through this? Maybe the question is, who do I allow to walk with me through it? Because the truth is, we were never meant to do this alone. And when we stop fighting to carry it all by ourselves, we finally realize we don't have to.